Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics, where we're taking a look at one of the greatest books that you've probably not read. So if you like to read classic books, if you like books that make you think, like books that challenge your perspective on life, then this is a video you will want to watch, and it's going to be quite short. So what is the book and why should you read it? Well, let's dig in, shall we? No matter who you are and what you've read, there are bound to be great novels that you've still not read. There's plenty out there. So why do I say this is the greatest novel you've probably not read? It's not actually because it is the greatest novel of all time. That's too subjective a statement. But it's because it is a significantly powerful novel that most people have forgotten about, or maybe have never even heard of it. Now, it had its day in the spotlight predominantly thanks to Bertrand Russell, the philosopher. But again, it's been forgotten. Now, I can take extra evidence of this because in Patreon, my Patreon group, I recommended this for one of the month's reads, and nearly all, said I would never have picked this book up if it hadn't been recommended, or never even heard of this book, and people were raving about it at the end. And the book is The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a précis of the book, and then we're going to talk about just why it's so great. This won't be too long a video, but you'll want to listen to this and see if it sounds like something you will challenge yourself with. So, the book itself follows a couple of generations of a family called the Pontifexes. It starts with a lovely man, old man called John Pontifex, who has made his way up in life. He has a son called George Pontifex, who of course has more things handed to him on a plate because his father had earned a good living in the past. George has certain defects in his personality, and we see his son, Theobald, also inherit those defects. We see how parenting is done in Victorian times, what's expected, this idea that society says this is the right way to do things, this is the wrong way, and how society comes to believe these things. It's quite intimidating and horrible how children were sometimes treated by Victorian parents, the harsh discipline, the unbending rules. But that's what it meant to be a good parent, was to, berate and silence your child into submission, and so they'd grow up to be good. But that was accepted back then. How does society come to accept things? And is the repetition of society's expectations actually justified? Why do we think it's the right way to do something when maybe it's actually not? After a Theobald, we come to the main character, Theobald's son, who is Ernest Pontifex. Now, Ernest Pontifex is a very impressionable young man, and he bumbles through life until he realises something which everyone in life should at some point realise. But most people will either never realise it, or if they do, won't pursue it. And this is the idea of truth. What is actually true? I'm going to read you a little snippet from this book, and this sums up a lot of what the book's about, and this will seriously challenge you as an individual. It's not a hard read, but this will challenge you to look at yourself and question the things that you take for granted, the things that you truly believe. Are they true? So this is what he says. As he lay on his bed day after day, slowly recovering, he woke up to the fact which most men arrive at sooner or later. I mean, that very few care two straws about truth, or have any confidence that it is righter and better to believe what is true than what is untrue, even though belief in the untruth may seem at first sight most expedient. Yet it is only these few who can be said to believe anything at all. The rest are simply unbelievers in disguise. You may have to rewind that and listen to it again, because there is a seriously profound idea there, which is what this book explores. And the way it sets the base for it, building up to Ernest, is excellent. What Samuel Butler does in this book is he says Most of us don't care about what is true. Now, if I were to say, are your beliefs true? You know, what you choose to follow, you would say yes, undoubtedly. Samuel Butler will challenge you and say, if you're like the majority of society, they're probably not. Or if what you follow is true, it's probably by accident because you've just inherited an idea and accepted it as true and gone along with it. But that doesn't really mean you're following it because you understand. It's just because you picked it up. And this is what Ernest Pontifex finds in his life. It's about a word called cant. The word cant does not appear in the book, but this is the idea. Cant is when we hear someone say something that sounds correct, and so we adopt it as our own saying, and we go around saying it because it makes us sound smart. But before long, those sayings become true in our mind. And there are loads of examples of this, and I should do another video on it. And it would upset thousands of people because it would poke at something they hold to be true, which may not necessarily be so. Now, with this book particularly, the question is, the majority of the question is over the church being the true institution, you know, belief in God, or not belief in God. The sciences move around in the background as well. Now, Samuel Butler himself was very critical of the church, and he is in this book. Now, you might think, if you're a believer watching this, that, oh, I don't want to read that. That's Samuel Butler's point. You know, well, do you believe something because it's true or because it's expedient to believe it, because you want to believe it? You may be someone who's not a believer and think, wow, that sounds my cup of tea. Because of that, Samuel Butler would criticize you as well and say, don't read something because you think it's going to back up what you believe. In fact, for the astute reader, you'll find that he's got criticisms of the scientific academical institutions as well. But he's always pulling out this idea of cant. I'll give you an example of a cant that's in this, which is also around today. Ernest will start questioning the church and the belief in God. But he later challenges or questions those who try to redefine faith as believing in something you have no evidence for. He recognises that's a false interpretation of the word, because the word faith has been around for thousands of years and means to believe in something you cannot see based upon evidence which you can infer that invisibility from. Simplest example, if I want to catch the bus, I haven't perceived the bus coming in the future, but I've got a ton of evidence that the bus goes and stops at this particular place. So based on that evidence, I will put my faith, my confidence in standing at a bus stop at a certain time, which is on the schedule, to get the bus. And likely that's going to pay off well, but I don't know the bus will come. In fact, many a time I've been to a bus stop and it didn't arrive. That's faith. And he points this out. He doesn't use the bus stop, by the way, as an example. But what he points out is the cant that people think, oh yeah, someone clever has said faith is belief in that which you can't see, or you've got no evidence for. And they've picked it up, taken it, it's become a truth to them. Now, he would say they're not really a believer in their truths. They're merely copying what they've learned from somebody else they've never explored. Flip side, he talks about the cant of some Christians in Victorian society. In fact, the majority, I would say, Samuel Butler is having an argument for, is that most people say they're Christian in his society, and they would think it a terrible thing to deny their Christianity or to deny belief in God and everything. But then he says, I'm quoting from the book now, I cannot call the church Christian until it produces the fruitage of a true Christian. He even says that people who claim to be Christian would be appalled if they had to actually live up to all of the Christian standards, because it would require them to go through a fair amount of self-denial. And so he says they don't truly believe it. It's not true to them. It's not actual truth, because if it was, they would follow it to its nth degree. He also makes a comment about all sorts of weird ideas. He says he has no problem with any dogma, that means teaching, and Darwin features in this, Interestingly, Samuel Butler accepted evolution, but he didn't agree with Darwin, which was quite prescient considering how the scientific community is moving now. But his point was, I don't have a problem with any idea in principle, so long as that idea is not held in the face of unrelenting facts. Or, even if you want to hold on to it, don't be so bound to an idea that you can't bend, because then you become the fanatic. He also says, don't be a fanatic to the point of requiring proof for everything. He talks about the error that lies in that. That's very revealing in this book. Now, I'm giving nothing away about the story, by the way. There is so much good in this. The contrast of some of the characters with one another, taking the Christian ideal. Those who seem to be very religious in this seem to often come across as the biggest hypocrites, whereas those who are actually not living the best life in Christian standards turn out to be pretty much the nicest people. Now, he's not trying to denounce the church there. A simplistic reading of this, if you get to the end of this book and conclude, well, Butler is telling me that religion is bad, belief in God is rubbish, and belief in evolution and something else is better, you've missed the point of this book altogether. Butler does not want you to agree with him. He wants you to search for truth. Argue with him. If you end up agreeing with him, agree for good reason. Don't agree because you like his conclusion. If you don't like his conclusion, don't dislike it because you don't like it, but be against him because you have reason for it. He doesn't claim, Ernest, that he's right in his conclusions. What he does claim is he's pursuing truth, and it is such a rare thing to find in people today. Now, how can I say that? Because I know full well there are going to be things I think are right which are actually not right. They're incorrect. I'll later have to discover them. But I've talked to thousands of people, and I do mean thousands, okay, and various topics. But on the whole, I have found, because I like to play devil's advocate with people, I have found people get very emotional about the topic. I'll use this topic, which I've talked about, which Samuel Butler talks about. Let's use God and no God. I've talked to people who believe in God and have questioned and asked questions. They've got their religion. I question and all. I've seen them get very emotional and start shouting down different points, but not the argument. And that's a weakness. You see, when you're trying to defend a position but not actually defend it based on reason, then you're not searching for truth, in my opinion, which is what Samuel Butler, I think, was getting at. However, I've also talked to people who are full-on atheist, right? And yet, doing the same thing and asking other questions there, I found exactly the same reaction. No difference at all. And the reason Samuel Butler says that's the case is amongst the majority of people, only a few seek the truth deeply enough to have dug right down to know why they believe what they believe, rather than just inheriting some idea. And that goes for both sides. No matter how much they claim the moral high ground or the intellectual high ground, the vast majority of people just suck up basic canards, cant, and espouse it as if they're intelligent. Read this book to see how it works, because Samuel Butler is saying that is the way of all flesh, not just dying. The fact that we choose to believe things or think things are true because we've heard it somewhere else and we don't actually know why we believe it, not the deep reasons. It's a quite profound eye-opener, this book. And if you want a book that's really, really going to get you to think, to wrestle with, to argue with, and to make you stand back and look at yourself and say, okay, in truth, where am I with some of my thoughts? This book is for you. It is amongst my favourite books. Maybe my favourite, I'm not sure. But but it's definitely up there. Because I just loved what he had seen in life. You know, he said in this that some people, they either don't seek for truth, or if they did, they're not even sure whether something being true or not matters. I can vouch for that, just using the same example when talking to people about that age-old question of God, no God. I've asked people, do you believe in God? No. Would it make a difference if there was one? No. That shows that they're not sure if truth would make a difference. And don't get me wrong, that's been the same with those I've met with religious beliefs. I've said, would it make a difference to you if you were actually wrong? And they've said, no. Well, where's the search for truth? Now, it's easy, if you're watching this, it's easy for me speaking about it to think, oh, these silly people. And to judge, whatever your disposition is, to judge the other side. Truth be told, the majority on either camp are pretty much the same, because they haven't dug down for truth, to really stop and think and go against the grain. There's even comments here about consensus, the reliance on the majority if someone says something, which is one of the worst arguments you can ever make in defense of a position. So yes, what an amazing book. Does this capture your interest? I hope you watched to the end of this video. If you did, you've got a certain patience and thoughtfulness about you, which probably suggests you would enjoy this book. The story itself is quite slow at the beginning, because Butler's not trying to go on a frolic of literary adventure. What he's trying to do is share something he's seen with us, with the world. He actually said the world wouldn't respond well to it in his time, and he was writing it for those few people who search for truth in the future. So I wonder what you make of it. If you do read this, please come back and tell me what you thought. Until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you read.